Welcome to the Writer's Room for Run Radio. My name is Trina Wilcox. My guest today, Gerald Everett Jones. Welcome.
Well, hi, Trina. Glad to be with you.
How are you doing?
Well, it's a beautiful day on the left coast in beautiful Santa Monica, just blocks from the Pacific
Ooh.
Ocean. But we are having winter, which, as I remarked to a friend of mine on a walk the other day, wow, it's cold today. It's like a warm day in Chicago.
Well, it's raining where I'm at, so it sounds like you might have a little bit better
We have the
outlook.
sun. We have the sun
Oh,
today, yes.
beautiful. Well, that's okay. I've got a dreary day and a nice book to cozy up with. So, we're going to talk a little bit about that, your writing history. You've got like a really impressive bio. So, tell me all about your career. Start where you want to start.
Well, my career, most of my working life, I have been a professional writer. I have at times been involved in computer graphics and in computer development. I mean, I have flown a desk from time to time, but I wrote actually. I got involved originally in educational film when I got out of college. I trained in both theater and literature. And I spent some time in France when they were trying to burn it down in '68. That kind of dates me. But my early writing career, I wrote business and technical books. And I had, in very short order, I had one of the larger agencies, uh, the people who had pushed the Dummies books, the Idiot's Guides, the Chicken Soup for the Soul, and they made it very clear to me that business and technical, that was their area. And about, a little bit more than a decade back, I informed them that, I really would like to concentrate on fiction. And the answer I got was, well, have a nice life, kid.
Oh my.
So I was actually a very early participant and adopter of self-publishing.
Nice.
The very first time I got involved in it was what they call print on demand, paperback.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they took some of my older books, my business books that had gone out of print, and they re-released them. And then it was under my publishing imprint. So I have concentrated on fiction. And Mick, Myra, and Bread is my 13th novel. And I've won just this side of, I think it's 20 book awards, which that'll buy you a cup of coffee someplace. I don't know. But
Congratulations. That's exciting.
Mick and Moira and Bread is a romantic comedy. And I will say you could say it's my first adult romantic comedy. I don't mean adult in a steamy sense, but I did my very first series of novels, and a series of 3, was coming of age romantic comedy.
Okay.
And it was about a young man who was making some really bad decisions about making his girlfriend jealous.
Okay.
And that was what we would call the engine of comedy. The first book was called My Inflatable Friend. And he was driving a lifelike doll around town, around Beverly Hills, in a borrowed convertible. And he had dressed the doll up to look like a Hollywood star. Well, innocent thing. But the thing is, the tabloids picked it up and they thought he was really involved with her. And so did his girlfriend. Didn't get him any points. So he gets involved in a lot of trouble. Then I did mysteries. I did a series of mysteries about I guess you could call him an agnostic preacher, somebody who was a very reluctant investigator in a small town. And I did some historical fiction, but then this one, if we come up to the present day, I was looking at some of the older Hollywood classic comedies, some of what they call the pre-code, before the heavy censorship, 1930s. And one of the things that struck me was how much these characters liked each other, how much they liked to engage each other in. They weren't fighting so much as they were having witty arguments, like Nick
Mhm.
and Nora Charles in The Thin Man, or Tracy and Hepburn in Adam's Rib. Um, and these were worthy adversaries, and the women were not in any way second best. I mean, they were all smart and aggressive, and they made their own decisions.
Mhm.
Now, one of the things that I realized, though, I have Moira, the female element of the love triangle here. Moira had been a criminal defense attorney, so she certainly is capable of being argumentative,
Mhm. She's a
and she's
go-getter.
not and she's not scared.
Mhm.
Now, Mick is a high-powered Hollywood agent, and he works for a packaging agency. Now, that's one of the things about the new Hollywood, if you will. It's been true for some years that the power has shifted from the studios, as it did with the contract players in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. The power has shifted to the agencies. And actually,
Mhm.
the studio bosses don't have the power that they used to. It's much more corporate now. An agency delivers an entire package to the studio, the distributor, the record label, the concert series. And that will include the star, the director, the music director, the cinematographer, video director, audio. All of this will be talent, ideally for the agency if it comes within the same agency, because they're making a piece of every talent, but they're also getting a packaging fee on the top, and maybe they're even participating in the money. So Mick is putting together this wonderful package for this big concert in Berlin, Beyonce Renaissance type concert.
Mhm.
Mercedes-Benz Arena, 18,000 people, except his star Chiffon informs him she's just gotten inconveniently pregnant, and by that time she won't be able to go on stage. And so Mick's got
Mhm.
to fill that slot. And one of Moira's friends hears her, influencer, if you will, hears her singing in the shower. She's been trained in classical opera. Okay. So she's pretty good at
Mhm.
that. No problem with singing. So she tells Mick, she said, you should really meet my friend. And they really got to shove somebody into this. It's not that that person has to be a star. Basically, they just have to step on stage so the agency doesn't get sued. And this does
Ah, right,
happen.
right.
There
Yeah.
have been major stars, names withheld to protect the guilty. There have been major stars that have not shown up at the last minute for major concerts, and those lawsuits do occur, and that's hundreds of millions of bucks. Okay, so Mick has got to do that, but at the same time, Myra's got this boyfriend now. Of course, romantic comedy. We've got the recurring character, the billionaire boyfriend. And so I thought,
Mhm.
okay, billionaire boyfriend, fund manager. Well, why don't we just have some fun with him? So this is something of a satire on billionaire boyfriends. But Myra's basic decision is she going to dump the billionaire so she can have a Hollywood career, or is she going to commit the rest of her life to stepping on one stage after another? Because the thing
Mhm.
is, one of the things she eventually learns is that Cher, for example, over a period of 50 years, Cher did 1,000 concerts. That's
I
not,
mean,
that's work.
that is, I mean, I just think of the vocal,
Well,
the
and
strain, the
and the other thing
performance.
that's
I
really
mean,
the other thing that's really kind of there's a lot of insider stuff in this Hollywood insider stuff, because while I was busy even writing those business and technical books, I was papering the town with spec screenplays. So I've definitely worked in that business, but one of the things that Myra discovers is, okay, she's going to step on stage. She's not really so much worried about the singing. They give her a lot of coverage, as really all stars do coverage of other previous stars, and they try to make it
mhm.
their own. Beyonce did At Last, Etta James, and then Etta James complained. She didn't do as well. But Moira realizes she tells the dance coach that they give her, the choreographer, she says, I don't dance. And she says, I'm worried I'm going to step right off the edge of the stage. And he says, let me tell you a secret, my dear. And he's this 7-foot tall descendant from Maasai warriors from Africa. Okay. This guy could have played pro basketball, right? And he says, my dear, I want you to do as little as possible. And she says, well, I don't dance. And she says, I don't want you to dance. He says, you have to understand. And if you ever actually saw the YouTube of Cher's farewell tour, there's one number, Dove L'Amore, where she is coming down a whole flight of stairs, and she's surrounded by a dozen male dancers, okay, bare-chested, ripped guys. And basically, she doesn't dance through most of that number. She's just taking step, pause, step, pause. And so the dance instructor tells Myra, what you're to do is you are to look to the lead dancer on your right. If you take a wrong turn, he will take a wrong turn. He's watching your every move.
Right.
And the other dancers are watching him. They're watching his every move. And he says, really, if you do this right, if you simply follow my instructions, it is a beautiful flock of birds. You all turn at the same time. And he said, the magic of this is the audience will think the universe revolves around you. This helps create you as a star.
So tell me a little bit about your process with character development. When you come from a technical background, which can at first might sound boring to some people, and then you've got this imagination and you've got, every character has this personality traits. How do you keep track of that? How do you take notes?
Well, the technical background does work for sci-fi, of course, of which I've ghostwritten some of that. I don't have any sci-fi of my own, but I think the main thing that background did was I had the benefit, because I worked for major publishers on those books, I had the benefit of working directly for professional editors.
Okay.
And I actually had to file an outline, and I would 2 chapters a week, and my wrist got slapped if I departed from the outline at all. So a matter of pacing and discipline I got from that process. Now, since that I now have my own small imprint and I'm doing the fiction, I'm basically, I do hire copy editors, and I have occasionally hired developmental editors. Often what I will do is usually after my second draft, after I've gone through and I think I've gotten the gaps and the bugs and whatever out of it, I will pass it along to a half dozen beta readers who are typically colleagues of mine, the other authors that I respect. And I just say, no, I don't want you to catch my typos. I mean, it'd be fine if you do, but don't look at that. Look at where did I lose you? Where did your interest flag? Where's there a gap in logic where you didn't understand how I got from here to there? You didn't understand when the flashback started or something like that. That's what I want to know at that point. But one of the things I've discovered is, even having written 2 outlines before, in writing fiction, it's so much better when you can put those characters on stage and let them go where they want to go. So for very many of my books, I don't know whether you would say every one of them, but for very many of my books, you don't really know how it turns out until the last page. Well, the reason is I didn't know how it was going to turn out until the last page.
Okay.
And that's great fun, because I feel as though, and this is how I entertain myself. I feel as though if I can delight myself, perhaps I can delight the reader. And in this book, yes, there's no doubt everything's up to Myra. Both of these men are manipulating her and trying to manipulate her in different ways. But you're not going to find out until the last page exactly where she ends up. And I think that's because there are some assumptions. I try to be careful that there are some assumptions you're going to make about where it's going to go, especially if you're thinking about the traditional love story or the traditional romantic comedy. You may figure like you've got it figured out, but I want to throw those plot twists in there so that and it can eat the twist can even be about small things. Is you just I've got one of the young music director who's something of a ringer for Prince, and he really doesn't want to be writing. They decide that they want the theme for Myra to be like old Hollywood. She can't do, she's not crime noir, hip hop, street. She with this opera background, she's going to sing standards and jazz and that. Okay, so this young guy, he can write and orchestrate anything, but he's a little bit out of his element. He's a little bit miffed that he doesn't get to do his own stuff. He wants to have his own album, but and they introduce him and he says, yes, my personal pronouns are me, myself, and I. and then he says the other thing you have to realize is, if we're going to make her a star, our gay men want to be this girl. Okay, I mean, think about Liza Minnelli, think about Cher. There has to be a persona. I mean, Cher, if you look at her concert videos, she changes a wig every third number. And it's ginormous. It's like it's pink this time, it's white next time, it's got pearls in it next time, and there's a whole costume change. And that's one of the things about Hollywood, especially now more than ever, is the star is a brand. And that's what the packaging agency does. It's their job to build that brand. So the brand is, your look, your costuming, your dress, your singing genre, but where you show up socially, the charity balls or the parties or the, God forbid, the personal scandals, but which sometimes get manufactured. But the bottom line here is, and it's always been true from the days of silent films, from the days of the early records, is that entertainment, if you will, and even art, is really all about emotion. The product is emotion. And I believe it was Jodie Foster who said that, when an audience leaves a movie theater, they're not going to probably remember anything I said. They're not going to be repeating my lines, but they're going to remember the emotion that I delivered the line with. They're going to remember how it made them feel. And, we want to make them cry or we want to make them laugh. And this is, again, when you're talking about the process of writing, this is what writers call the engine of comedy. What situation are you putting the character in that creates some kind of conflict that has to be resolved? And, the comedy writers will say there's only three ways to generate comedy. Is you have to make somebody, you have to reduce, and often it's the main character or it's the main character doing to somebody else. You have to reduce the human being. So you make them look like an animal, you make them look like a machine, or you make them look like a baby. Those are, and I mean, think about it. The old slip on a banana peel, that's literally reducing the character, making them look, I mean, and in the old days in the silent film, that was a fat banker who had, a three-piece suit and a gold watch and, was an image of everything the audience didn't have. All the vanities that they thought were pompous and hypocritical. And so you're reducing that person to be basically a helpless animal on the sidewalk, somebody who's flailing and, they've fallen and they can't get up. Another example of engine of comedy is, Larry David, when he wrote for Seinfeld and in Curb Your Enthusiasm, the engine of comedy is always the same. In the very first scene, he makes a bad decision and he commits some kind of social gaffe, like he insults somebody or he embarrasses somebody. And then the rest of the episode is him trying to make good. He's trying to apologize. He's trying to do, or sometimes it's a revenge payback. he does a lot of that. So, but again, it's an engine that just keeps producing action and entertaining situations, and usually conflict, because conflict is drama, and that goes back to Aristotle. conflict is there, and an argument. An argument is, and
Right.
that's what I like about McMara and Brad is those three characters. If they weren't involved in this love triangle, they'd probably be friends.
Yeah.
At a cocktail party, they'd be the three people that you find standing with each other, sharing jokes or how things went at the office. And so it's not about viciousness or jealousy or knives out or payback or anything like that. It's more like what the British would call a full and frank exchange of views. Okay,
Hmm. Mhm.
it's like verbal sword fighting, and I just find that enormously entertaining. And there have been some reviews of the book that have said they thought those were the most engaging parts of it, when these characters engage. I mean, um, even when they're getting along. I mean, no two people who live in close proximity to each other can agree about everything. I mean, certainly
Right, right.
COVID proved that one, right?
Uh,
And the ones that didn't end in divorce, maybe they ended up in couples therapy. But as the therapists often say, how do you argue? And some of the couples go, "Oh, well, we don't fight." And then the therapist says, "Well, that's a problem."
yeah, right, right. So have you ever got to the end and not liked where you landed and rewritten your ending?
That will more often happen at the end of a scene
Okay.
where it doesn't properly set it up for where I kind of thought it was going. Now, if there was where I thought it was going, maybe if this way is more interesting, I'll have to rethink from the beginning. And I'll usually have to, I think it was Chekhov who said, if you if you if you put a gun on the wall in the first act, you better fire it by the third act.
Oh,
You really do need to, I call it backward integration. You have to, if there's a good example, again, going back to firearms or battle, if you have a character who engages in a martial arts sword fight in the third act, you'd better have a training scene in the first act. Okay, so if you make that decision late, then that means you better go back and you've got to plant those seeds. And again, that's great fun, because in planting those seeds, you don't want to necessarily be obvious. You don't want them to necessarily know what's coming is what you're planting the seed for. You may want to misdirect the reader thinking, oh, you know, um, uh, she's got a wounded arm, so she's not going to be able. There's no way she's going to be in the sword fight. Well, but then she gets her kickboxing lesson. This is, you scramble it up so that it's always a reversal. It's always the page turn, and that's another thing that you learn to do is the end of chapters. You want that cliffhanger. You want that curiosity. You want that question. And I think it was Dan Brown who advised, and he's a master of page turners. He said, you want the last line of every chapter to raise a question in the reader's mind. And it's a matter of what will happen next, what will happen to her, how will he get out of this. I mean, so it can be physical jeopardy, the water's rising and they can't get out of the room,
right.
or they're having an argument. It looks like she won, um, and then he's going to have to pay. He's going to have to pay some price. Well, we do. Are we rooting for him so he doesn't have to pay the price, or are we
Hmm.
are we
Hmm.
waiting for him to get his just dessert so we want him to pay the price? So it's all about that.
So do you ever have the storyline going on in your head, like when you're not working on the book and you have to stop and take notes because something you feel like would be good for it, or you want to put it in there, or are you really good at just writing when it's writing time?
Well, I do both, and I mean I write what almost sometimes seems like stream of consciousness when it's really working. But I will say that what you describe is practically a daily occurrence for writers, at least the ones that
Yeah.
I know. Is the idea that something comes to you in the shower. Well, one of the things about the shower is the shower creates white noise, and white
Mhm.
noise jumbles your brain, and it actually I mean, the psychiatrist will tell you it actually stimulates thoughts that are not relevant, or memories that you didn't recall, that kind of thing. I knew a writer also, Lee David Zlotoff, who created MacGyver. He confessed that in early days of his career he didn't have an office, and he would go to the Santa Monica Public Library to work. Well, he found out that he couldn't stare at a blank piece of paper. He was just stuck. So what he would do is he would ask himself a question, and he would walk around the library. But he had to look like he was looking for a book, or else he'd get tossed out, because you're not supposed to
Right.
be loitering in the library. But he said usually by the time he returned to his desk, he had the answer. And the idea is, it's like falling asleep and resolving that by the morning your subconscious is going to give you you're asking another part of your
Mm.
subconscious, unconscious, whatever you will. You're asking for an answer from another part of you. And again, working without an outline, that does allow not only the subconscious to express, but one of the things that delights me is how clever it is, because there's some trait that I gave somebody early on that I don't know why. I mean, it just seemed interesting to add that detail. Well, it shows up later, and it turns out it's significant, and that's great for writing mysteries. It's great for surprising with comedy. And again, people often said to me, friends, Gerald, you seem to, you just, I mean, it's not like you have no friends, but you like being with yourself a lot. And okay, I'm in the right profession.
I want to go back for a minute and talk about your decision to self-publish. What gave you the confidence to go ahead and self-publish instead of shopping it around on and on?
I did shop it around. I mean, I
Okay.
I did queries to 100. You figure out the electronic queries, and that's how it's done now, mostly. And I'd query 100 agents. I'd get maybe 6 responses, and maybe one or two would want to read something. And I had pitch meetings. They ended up being Zoom pitch meetings during COVID and that kind of thing. I mean, I have tried, especially every time I switched genre, I would launch
Mhm.
into like a new campaign. But I mean, I always came back to, I think one of the things that helps with self-publishing is you recognize that you have control, and you have the ability to make your own mistakes. And this is one of the things that I will say in today's market is, for a first time, especially novelist or memoirist, your I think your situation is going to be a whole lot more satisfying if you self-publish and jump in the game, because so much of publishing involves self-promotion, and these days
Mhm.
social media, and the website, the blog, the contact, uh, um, the the little premium that they get for joining your mailing list, whether that be a free book or and that can work also for nonfiction, where like ticket to my seminar and my online, and then
Right,
I'm going to
right.
tell you why you need me and all like that. And I will say that if you spend a year doing that after self-publishing, you're going to be so much further ahead than
Mhm.
somebody who's waiting, because actually it'll typically, it would take agents 6 weeks to get back to you. It would then, if they like it, they'll take them another 6 weeks to sell it to a publisher. Then the publisher's going to take a month to negotiate contract and find and task the
Right, right,
editor.
right.
And then the publisher has got to put it either on the spring catalog or their fall catalog traditionally. And it could be another year and a half before your book is actually in a store, if it ever got to a store. So if you self-publish, I mean, on Kindle, I mean, when you press that send, the world has it.
Yeah.
Okay. And so there's a lot of the first time publishing is being done on Kindle and EPUB. And I just and again, that's worldwide presence. I mean, paperback costs are going way up, And a print on demand is more expensive than traditional printing, but that's like if you need a book, you print a book, okay, or you print 5 books. But in traditional publishing, you got a run of 500 copies. Where are you going to put those? In your garage? I mean,
Right.
that's the old way. And 90% of, I just heard the statistics. These 90%, there's 1 million books published every year. 90% of books will sell less than 200 copies lifetime. Now, what I feel and I've discovered is I do a lot of newsletter promotion. I do a lot of giveaways and free promotions. And I have done free promotions where over a weekend, I think my best promotion, it was 5,000 copies downloaded.
Oh,
Okay.
wow.
On Monday morning, when it went back to full price, 2 copies.
Wow.
Okay, so you have, as an author, you have to ask yourself, what's more important, an audience or a bank account? Because I mean, I'm not that young. I hope I have, a couple of decades left, but after I'm gone, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, the books that I wrote will be sitting on a shelf or, in a digital repository alongside books that people paid real money for. And they did some of mine. But the audiences of the future are not going to know which books were purchased and which weren't. Mine have gotten reviews every bit as good. I mean, some of my literary fiction. I mean, one of my Harry Harambe's Kenyan Sundowner, which is a literary fiction set in East Africa, that won 8 book awards. And so,
awesome.
So it's more a matter of, well, I call it, here's the word. I call it garage band marketing. Okay. No, every kid in a garage band has to understand, number one, how to play nice with others, which is a difficult lesson for some. They all want to be louder than the other one. But the second lesson is understand there's no limousine going to pull up to your garage door and say, would you like to play the Hollywood Bowl?
Right.
It just does not happen that the whole over. I mean, yes, one of the first requirements in Moira's world is, when you have a publicist, the first thing you have to do is invent a story about how you made it overnight. It doesn't happen that way. It doesn't happen. And so, the people in the garage bands, the stand-up comedians, they're playing in clubs at 2 a.m. when there's 3 people in the audience. They might be asleep. Okay. Yeah. You're going to basically, an agent that I met once called it exposure work. He said, you're just going to open your kimono and expose yourself every chance.
Oh my goodness.
And that you've got to hang it out there. You've got to have, and so that audience, you've got to get to a critical mass where there are people talking about your stuff and even, I think one of the things that authors in the early stages might not understand is the number of I need to have all 5-star reviews, or I need to at least have 4.5. Look at any bestseller on Amazon. It's going to have everything from 1-star reviews to 5-star reviews, and it may have as many 2-star reviews. And it's like, guess what? And actually, I recall I had a 2-star review on that literary novel that won so many awards, and it was from a nurse in Canada, and I think she was a mature person. I don't think she was young, but there was a love interest. There was an interracial love interest in this story. It was basically middle-aged adults meeting up in Africa. Okay. And it had its controversial elements, certainly, and it had its sexist and racist elements, although not the elements that one would expect, because everything is different everywhere. Okay. You can't make the same assumptions about what, I mean, there's 43 different races or tribes in Africa. Though that's the racism today, though that's the conflict. I mean, the colonialism in some ways, it's like you're just either a rich tourist or you're an investor. Either way, love to have you. Okay. But coming back to this review, this woman goes, I was so infuriated by that character. I would have slapped him. I would have slapped his face and I would have walked out on him. And I'm thinking that response was so emotional. You know, I, one way or another, that book got to
You
her.
created emotion.
Now,
All right.
okay.
I hate to cut you off. We're about out of time here. I don't real quick in like less than 30 seconds, your best tip for writers.
GeraldEverettJones.com will take you to my website and you can see how an author's website is built. You can see its blog page where I have a Thinking About Thinking series. And because I talk about other books that interest me, not just mine. And then also it's got a press release page and a contact form and all that good stuff. And there's a couple of free books there.
Ooh, very good. Exciting. Thank you for spending some time where your next release is ready. Please come back and talk about it. I'm really excited to keep going with Mick, Moria, and Brad. And I just appreciate you spending time sharing your insight.
Well, I'm writing the sequel. I'm about 20% done. So we'll get there.
So you'll be back. All right. Thanks so much, Gerald Everett Jones, for Run Radio's Writer's Room. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Trina.